Michigan versus Texas provides us with the first top 10 matchup of the 2024 college football season. Texas is laying 7.5 on the road against the defending national champions, the Michigan Wolverines. Before we do this game preview and I give my prediction, please like the video, click that subscribe button, smash the notification bell, and also share this video around to other college football fans so that we can grow our base, our awesome community, the best Big Ten football and college football channel on YouTube, and so that we can get this video and consequentially channel into the algorithm. I also encourage you to comment your own preview, analysis, and predictions down in the comment section below, as we on College Football with Sam pride ourselves on receiving feedback and engaging with you, the college football fan, viewer, and commenter. But as I already said, Texas is laying 7.5 on the road against Michigan. The line earlier opened up at around 3.5, 4. It reopened, I believe, at 6.5, 6. It's now moved all the way up to 7.5. And that is understandable when you look at how Texas and Michigan played in week one. Texas beat Colorado State 52-0. They shut them out, dominated them the whole way. Michigan beat Fresno State by a score of 30-10. Now, what I will say is Fresno State is better, perhaps way better than Colorado State, but at a group of 5 level. Even when you factor that in, Texas had the more impressive performance. They scored 35 of their 52 points in the first half. They held Colorado State to under 200 total yards, forced 2 turnovers, held them to 11 first downs, and Ewers did make some mistakes. The run offense and run defense for Texas wasn't perfect, and they still beat them 52-0 because their rushing offense and defense, again, while it showed a little bit of weakness compared to last year, they still ran for 190 yards, 3 touchdowns, averaged 4.6 yards per carry. They held Colorado State to under 4 yards per carry without sacking Braden Fowler-Nicolosi once, and they held Colorado State to only passing for 3.1 yards per attempt and picked them off twice, which is impressive for a Texas secondary that struggled all of last season. Quinn Ewers and Arch Manning combined for 355 passing yards, 4 touchdowns, a pick, averaged over 10 yards per pass attempt. Thorough dominance by the Longhorns. Michigan, on the other hand, scored 20 of their 30 points in the second half. At one point, the score was 16-10 Michigan in the fourth quarter. Michigan then put on the gas on offense, scoring a late touchdown drive, and Will Johnson's pick 6 sealed it. Michigan held Fresno State to an impressive 244 yards, but they only put up 269 total. Michigan threw a bad pick. Fresno State threw 2 bad picks. Michigan controlled the clock to a pretty solid degree, given the fact they only had 25 extra total yards, and Fresno State and Michigan broke even on first downs. The Wolverines ran for 148 total yards, 4.4 yards per carry. They held Fresno State to 9 yards rushing, less than a yard per carry. They had 3 sacks, 6 TFLs, held Mikey Keene, who I think is a good quarterback, to 235 yards, a touchdown, 2 picks. So both defenses showed out. Michigan's, I think, showed they're one of the nation's elite still. Texas is certainly up there. I don't know if I'd put them in the category of elite. But Texas's offense showed that even with a vanilla playbook and even being very basic, they're a top 10 offense nationally. Michigan's offense could very well be outside of the top 50 or even top 75 based off of their performance against Fresno State, which indeed was rather, to put it kindly, disappointing. But that's week one. We only have one game of sample size to go off of, so I want to dive into the weakness, I think, of each team, strength, and then get on to some of the impact players and really dig into these teams. And it's hard to do that when you only have one game to work off of. So I'm going to go off of a lot of what I studied in the preseason and a lot of 2023, but also working in what we saw in week one. Michigan, straight up, their pass offense is their weakness. quarterback Davis Warren and the wide receivers, whether that's Samaj Morgan, Tyler Morris, Frederick Moore, they were basically a non-factor in Michigan's offense. And Michigan, historically, over the past several seasons, their weakness was their passing offense. Last season, it was one of the more efficient passing offenses in the country, but in 2021, 2022, and it looks like it's going to be the same thing this year in 2024, it's what held the offense back. Warren was 15 of 25 for 118 total yards, a touchdown, a pick, a 33 quarterback efficiency rating. Tyler Morris, Kendrick Bell, and Samaj Morgan combined for 6 receptions for, wow, this is sad, 34 yards and no touchdowns. So the passing game as it relates especially to the quarterback and receiver was a non-factor. I think that's clearly a weakness this year, not just based off Michigan's performance against Fresno State, but partially based off of what I've studied in the preseason. Michigan had a lot of questions at quarterback and wide receiver in spring, summer, and fall camp, and I don't think it's bore to fruition in a good way, this passing offense has. For Texas, their weakness is pass defense. Now, they were very impressive in week 1, but Colorado State only has one good player in their passing offense. That's wide receiver Torrey Horton, who could be playing on Sundays. Texas did an admirable job, but last year they had the nation's #1 run defense. They had a secondary that was consistently outside of the top 25, outside of the top 50. Washington averaged over 10 yards per pass attempt on them. Jalen Milroe, when he wasn't throwing the ball to them, was able to get it well over their head, well into the defensive backfield. And against other teams like TCU or Houston, Texas's secondary struggled and kept Texas in a plethora of games that they would have liked to pull away from earlier, but their opponents were able to utilize their receivers and Texas's weakness in the defensive backfield to keep those games closer. And I think that they have made some improvements bringing in Makuba from the transfer portal, and their secondary was young last year, but they do have questions at DB, and I don't think they were tested much, if at all, in their game against Colorado State. You look at running back for Texas, obviously not a part of the pass defense, but with C.J. Baxter tragically being hurt and also one of Texas's 4th-string running backs or one of their running backs in the rotation being injured, they have had to have players step up. We'll see if they continue that tradition this game. And I say tradition because Texas has a deep running back room regardless. I don't know if it's still one of the nation's best or up there in terms of being near elite or elite, with Baxter again tragically being hurt. Please pray for him that he heals and just has a huge bounce back year in 2025. Jarrett Gibson, a freshman, stepped up and had 10 carries for 67 yards and a touchdown, and only had a long of 22, so he was able to consistently utilize a strong offensive line to make things happen. But he'll be facing, along with Texas's offensive line, a much bigger challenge this Saturday than Colorado State's defense, going from one of the worst defenses to one of the best defenses. But I really want to not take away from the fact that Texas's secondary, that's their main weakness. At running back, they have players. It's an area of question, area of concern, mainly for depth, so I wanted to list that out there. But it's really the secondary that is Texas's biggest question mark, biggest weak link. When you look at the strengths of these teams, Michigan's strength from a roster build, from preseason research, from history, and also from their game against Fresno State is their run offense. Michigan at one point was averaging only 2 yards per carry, which is rather pathetic by their own standards. But in the fourth quarter, Kalel Mullings and Alex Orji put together some drives, and that ended with a Davis Warren passing touchdown to Colston Loveland. And I think Michigan, it's the same thing with Texas, and I'll get to that in a few minutes here. Michigan, and I think really both of these teams offensively, because I think it's easier to hold things back on offense because you have more formations, more plays, a more diverse set of players. It's easier to hide things or to play vanilla on offense than defense. I think Michigan may have hid some things more so in the run offense than the pass offense. The pass offense just looked so undesirable at times that even if they were holding things back, I don't know how much of a difference it'll make. But Michigan's run offense was hitting strides in the fourth quarter. If they can continue that, it's going to be one of the better running offenses, one of the more consistent rushing offenses in college football. We'll have to see how that works this Saturday. But they eventually ran for close to 5 yards per carry before they took a knee, and that was mainly because of Khalil Mullings, Alex Orji. You have to pay attention to Donovan Edwards, too, even though he had a bad game due to the fact that he is a big play merchant. You get him in space, he will do wonders, and he's had a habit of showing up in these big games. Michigan's bigger strength is their run defense. Michigan held Fresno State to 9 yards rushing, 0.4 yards per carry. And last season, they held opponents to well under 100 rushing yards and under 4 yards per carry. It's very impressive for Michigan. And they return Mason Graham, Kenneth Grant, Josiah Stewart, Derek Moore. Really, that entire defensive line, which had 3 sacks on Fresno State, is a strength of the team, along with linebacker, where Jayshon Barnham and Ernst Hausman are the starters. Defensive back with Will Johnson, Makari Page, Amir Hall, Wesley Walker. Special teams with punter Tommy Doman and kicker Dominic Svada, and also return specialist Samaj Morgan. On the offensive line, Michigan lost 6 players from last season, but Greg Crippen, I think, looked better at center. Josh Preeb and Giovanni El-Hadi, I think, make up the strength of the O-line at guard. And Michigan's pass protection, while again not perfect against Fresno State, with Miles Hinton and others rotating in, I think did a better job than perhaps some people believed. But when starting new quarterbacks, Alex Orji rotating in, but more so Davis Warren, you're not going to have that same pocket presence that a veteran like McCarthy had. And obviously tight end Colston Loveland and running back Donovan Edwards and running back Khalil Mullings as well, I think, make up strong rooms there. Michigan's strength is in the trenches. It's game control. It's running the ball. It's more so stopping the run. They have questions at running the ball, but I am giving them some benefit of the doubt. And it's also just playing solid, elite, stingy defense and making big plays on defense. They did that last year, and they did it this past Saturday against Fresno State with that Will Johnson pick 6. For Texas, their strengths, I think, are their passing offense. Now, they did lose all 3 of their starting receivers from last year. They lost Jordan Whittington. They lost A.D. Mitchell. They lost Xavier Worthy. And they lost Jatavion Sanders, who's one of my favorite tight ends last year. But, like Michigan, with the offensive line, I am going to give Texas benefit of the doubt at wide receiver, especially because they brought in portal guys. They brought in Matthew Golden, Isaiah Bond, Silas Bolden, Amari Niblack at tight end. They are, I'm telling you, they have weapons everywhere at receiver, tight end. They have depth there too. You got Jonte Cook, who is going to be in the rotation for Texas, and also Ryan Wingo. So there are backups at Texas who I think, by the way, just relating this to Michigan's weaknesses, I think a lot of the backups at Texas would start at Michigan. There's a big disparity in those wide receiver rooms. And then there's quarterback Quinn Ewers, who's been starting at Texas in 2022, 2023. This will be his 3rd year starting. And he has had some inconsistencies, but he is a great near-elite quarterback, 5-star out of high school, so you know he probably has that elite ceiling, and he has a veteran offensive line. I think Texas's passing offense is certainly lethal, and their run defense, while I don't think it'll be nearly as good as last season's, and they do have some questions at D tackle, I think they've arguably upgraded their defensive end room. They've upgraded at linebacker, and Alfred Collins, I have faith in him as a defensive tackle. So while the run defense I don't think will be top 5, top 10, it's certainly good. Michigan will have a bigger challenge in run defense and probably pass defense as well against Texas when they play them on Saturday. I really like what I see with Texas in the trenches as well, again, with Trey Moore, Alfred Collins, Baron Sorrell, and then also Jake Majors at center and Kelvin Banks at offensive tackle, who's one of the best and most NFL-ready offensive tackles in all of the country. Special teams, much like with Michigan, it's another strength for Texas. Silas Bolden is one of the best return specialists in the country. He was that at Oregon State last year, so I am going to assume that with Texas, who's had great special teams play last season and in a lot of seasons under Steve Sarkisian, especially with Bert Auburn at kicker, that he'll do well and that Texas overall will be dangerous on special teams. I watched film of that Colorado State-Texas game. Silas Bolden nearly broke one early in the game, and I could see him giving Michigan some fits on special teams. This is going to be a fascinating battle, I'm telling you. You have elite special teams units, you have X-factor players on all sides of the football, and it's just going to be a great game. It's going to be very close. There's a reason why Texas, even being ranked better in the preseason or ranked higher, pardon my vocabulary, ranked higher, viewed as the superior team. They have the superior talent roster. They had the more efficient performance in week one, and they were given way higher national championship odds by Vegas, so on. I mean, everything going in the direction of Texas in the preseason by most people, by a plethora of serious analysts who do their research, and yet they're only favored by 7.5. Granted, it's at Michigan Stadium, who probably has closer to a 7-point home field advantage or even a 10-point home field advantage than they do a 3-point advantage, but nonetheless, it shows that people think this is going to be a close game. That's what I see when studying these rosters, the X-factor players, the coaches, the matchup advantages or disadvantages. That's what I see is a close game. And the over-under, by the way, 43.5. So somewhere in between, Texas 24, Michigan 17, Michigan 20, Texas 27. That's about the predicted score if you read the over-under, and also the favorite, the point spread by Vegas. Let's get to Michigan's impact players and then check out Texas's impact players, and then I will show you my prediction. Michigan's impact players. The goal for Michigan, I think, in this game is to utilize their players to scheme their game plan, to control the clock, and to make viewers uncomfortable. Consequentially, I look at the ground game, I look at blocking, and I look, of course, on defense, particularly players who can make an impact in the pass defense. Michigan has Kenneth Grant, they have Mason Graham, they have Rayshawn Benny, and their linebackers are good. I think that Michigan does have a pretty serious matchup advantage with run defense versus Texas's rushing offense, but Texas has one of the best passing offenses in college football, at least the potential to have one of the best passing offenses in college football. Again, it's only 1 week into the season, and Texas is returning. They're returning quarterback and offensive line play, not much at wide receiver. It's the same thing with Michigan. They have the potential to have an awesome rushing attack with Orji and their running back room, but we have to see how the offensive line builds itself. But with Michigan, Donovan Edwards has to have a big game. He had 11 rushing attempts, 27 yards, only averaged about 2.5 yards per carry. It's not good enough, and he didn't have a rushing touchdown. He had a receiving touchdown of 3 yards, but then he also had a reception that went for negative yardage. He did not have a good game against Fresno State, and he needs to have a big game or at least a better performance against Texas. If he doesn't get any touchdowns, but he averages 4 or 5 yards per carry against a Texas run defense that I think will be good, then he'll have a better game. He'll give Michigan a much better shot to win, and that'll probably increase his confidence for the rest of the season. For Colston Loveland at tight end, 8 receptions, 87 yards, about 11 yards per reception and a receiving touchdown. He had a big game against Fresno State. I look for him to potentially have a big game here. I think Michigan has an advantage at tight end versus Texas's linebackers, and I'll go as far to say even with Texas having a secondary with questions, they probably have an advantage, or at least they cancel Michigan's wide receiver room. So Colston Loveland will have to have a big game, and Michigan will have to scheme incredibly well for them to have a passing offense that has a big game, or at least a good day. Michigan will probably have a below average or average passing offense relative to just pure stats and efficiency, just looking at this matchup and the questions they had against Fresno State. So Loveland having a big game is an imperative. I'd say especially at blocking, though. For Josiah Stewart and Will Johnson, they're up here because Josiah Stewart and Will Johnson had the biggest moments in defending the pass against Fresno State. Josiah Stewart, I think, is the best defensive end on the team. Johnson might be the best player on the team. Stewart has had 2 sacks, 3 TFLs this season, and Will Johnson had an interception returned for a touchdown. Johnson needs to have a better game against Texas. He got burned against Fresno State 2 or 3 times. You can't give up those plays against Texas because they're not going to drop the ball. They're not going to throw as inaccurate of passes. Ewers has shown that he sometimes can turn over the ball or just not have good games and not be accurate. But his floor, honestly, is probably Mikey Keene's ceiling or even higher. So Will Johnson has to have a good game. Josiah Stewart, him matching up with Kelvin Banks, or maybe it's Derek Moore or one of the defensive tackles, depending on what happens. That will be fascinating to watch. How does Texas's O-line handle Michigan's defensive line? And how does Michigan's defensive line attack an offensive line of Texas that is bringing back thousands of snaps and several starts? And finally, kicker Dominic Zvada. He was 3 of 3 on field goals from 40 yards or more, 3 of 3 overall, and he was 2 of 2 on field goals of 50 yards or more. And that's important because Michigan has shown against Fresno State and also in the past outside of 2023 that once they get into the red zone, they get bogged down. And having a good kicker, especially for a team like Michigan, is important. It's the same thing, I believe, with Texas. I'll start off with Bert Auburn for Texas. 7 of 7 on extra points, 1 of 1 on field goals overall, and of 40 yards or more. But I wanted to include, because he didn't have as big of a game as Zvada did in week 1, that Auburn was 28 of 34 for field goals in 2023 last season. The goal of Texas is to make Michigan one-dimensional on offense and defense with their players. Make Michigan have to only pass the ball and make it so that Michigan's only effective at stopping the run, because I don't think Texas is going to run the ball for a bajillion yards and dominate Michigan up front. The pathway for Texas is to have an efficient passing game, a super efficient passing game, and force Michigan to pass the ball for as many times, or more likely more times, than running the football. Get up early on Michigan and make them one-dimensional. And Texas has the passing offense to do that, and also the defense overall. And with Bert Auburn, he was a weapon for Texas last year and a big part of their offense because they struggled in the red zone. They, I think, were a lot like Michigan in previous seasons, where they could move the ball well in between the 20s, but often they got bogged down in the red zone. They had a pretty low red zone conversion rate for scoring touchdowns last season, and Auburn was able to somewhat compensate them with that. He has a big leg, he's accurate, he's clutch, he's reliable. Big impact player for them. Quinn Ewers at quarterback went 20 of 27 for 260 yards, 3 touchdowns, a pick, a 71.9 QBR against Colorado State. Much better quarterback than anything Michigan has. With the receivers he has, he's going to, I would say, guarantee pass for 200 yards or more. Maybe at minimum like 175, but I'd say 200 or more with the receivers that he has. He has to play a better game, though. He has to be more efficient. He cannot turn the ball over, or if he does, not more than once, and he has to be accurate. Basically, play like he did in his better moments of 2023. That's who Quinn Ewers has to be in this game. He is accurate. He has arm strength. He's a veteran, too. He's played on the road and beaten Alabama last year, so there's no reason why he can't go into Ann Arbor and lead Texas's offense and team to a top 10 victory and solidify Texas as being one of the best teams in college football. Wide receivers Isaiah Bond and Silas Bolden, they combined for 6 receptions, 66 receiving yards, and 2 receiving touchdowns. Bond was very reliable at Alabama. I thought that he was held back a little bit by their scheme and also by Jalen Milroe's inconsistency. And he transferred to Texas, and right now He's not their leading receiver. That's actually Ryan Wingo, but I think he'll emerge as their main receiving threat along with maybe Matthew Golden. Silas Bolden is an elite return specialist along with being one of the nation's better wide receivers. He's very quick, agile, elusive, and I think he'll be a prime threat in the return game and also in open space. So pay attention to him. Texas also has great red zone targets too, like Amari Niblack, for example, at tight end. Big tight end there. But I want to move on to the defense, then get to my prediction. The player I'm looking at for Texas on defense is defensive tackle Alfred Collins. He graded highly last season in 2023 when he was a backup to Sweat and Murphy. He only had one solo tackle in this game. And by this game, I mean against Colorado State in week 1. But the interior, him and Bill Norton and those linebackers, they need to step up. And they need to make Michigan one-dimensional. They need to stop the run. And I think that this is a good run defense, so there is a very good chance that that will happen. Similarly to college football nerds, I want to admit that I don't exactly know how this game is going to go. It is, after all, only 1 week into the season. Both teams are 1-0. They're very talented. Texas returns more production, and I would probably guarantee a Texas win if this was on the road, and I'd pick them if it's neutral field. But I'm going with Michigan here because I think that both teams held things back in week 1 pretty evenly for week 2. And this is a big game. They're going to play their A-plus game, A-minus, somewhere in there. And while I think both teams, again, will do that, I think Michigan being at home, having a big home field advantage, I think they're going to play closer to their ceiling than Texas will, which isn't the best explanation for why I'm picking Michigan, but I think this is a better one. It's more so the fact that I think Michigan will actually do a better job of making Texas one-dimensional on offense than the other way around. Michigan's passing attack is not going to be good. It's not going to be the reason they win this game. If it is, then Texas has some major issues they have to work with, because what I watched from Michigan and Fresno State on August 31st, Michigan does not have a good passing attack. But they do have Colston Loveland, who's a non-negotiable. They absolutely do. And he will consistently keep Texas honest in pass defense, and Michigan's offensive line and Alex Orji being mixed in at quarterback, and Donovan Edwards and Kalel Mullings. I think Mullings, especially with his power back ability, reminds me a lot of Hassan Haskins. I think they will be able to run the ball for decent chunks. Not a lot of explosive plays, potentially not any, but decent chunks to move the ball in between the 20s, kick a lot of field goals. I think both sides will force a turnover out of each other. The turnover margin should be relatively even. But back to my point about Michigan versus Texas. Texas will be able to pass the ball on Michigan. But I think Michigan, with Will Johnson, with Makari Page, with Zeke Berry, with their linebackers, and with their defensive line, will be able to do a decent job of making Ewers uncomfortable, of slowing down some of those Texas receivers who, much like pieces on Michigan's offense, those Texas receivers are new in a lot of ways. And as for Texas on the ground, I have a very hard time seeing them run that well on Michigan. I think Michigan will stonewall them at the line of scrimmage. And while Texas could stop Michigan on the ground with all that they lose and the questions that they have in pass defense, I think Michigan will be able to scheme up enough passes to Colston Loveland, enough runs from Alex Orji, runs from the running backs, enough pull blocking and motion to, with home field advantage, with crowd noise, escape with a win. And yes, I said escape, because I think that Texas is the better team neutral field, and I think this will be a close game no matter who wins. I can easily see Texas winning this game, and it's actually understandable why they're favored by 7.5 points. I think they should be the favorite entering this game. But Michigan comes out with a win, 23-20. Thank you all so much for watching this video. Remember to like, subscribe, click the notification bell, and comment your thoughts down below. Thanks to Crash2488 and Brasco Rascal for sponsoring this video and channel as Heisman members. Thanks to Chris Lane, Connor Little OH, Ismar, and Tyler Nye for sponsoring this video and channel is all American members. Thanks to John Lynn, Roaming Gnome, Matthew Sale, Austin Christmas, and Janaisha Cockrow for sponsoring this video and channel is all conference members. If you want merchandise, like what I was wearing, for example, signed by me and delivered to your door for free at my cost, sign up as a Heisman member and stay for 6 months. It's just that simple, and you will get bonus content, specifically live shows. And by live shows, I mean live coverages of games. For week 2, that will be Colorado versus Nebraska. I will be live streaming that on the Patreon channel. So if you want to watch that, sign up as an All-American or Heisman member. If you just want my merchandise without any of the membership stuff, you can purchase it via the link in the description or down below in the pinned comment. That's also how you will access my Patreon page. Have a great day, guys, and I will see you all very soon. Bye-bye.